Hey guys, good evening everyone. In the last session, we discussed how to create service registry, how to create admin server project, and how to start the Jipkin server. And we created one backend API also, that is the Greet API. Today, we are going to understand how to create one more API and how to establish inter-service communication from one API to another API. So if you see here, my service registry application is running. It is running on the port number 8761. That is the default port number that I am giving for the Eureka. Then after, my admin server is available. Admin server is running on the port number 1111. It is used to monitor all the actuator endpoints at one place. And I have my Jipkin server. It is used for distributed log tracing. It is running on the port number 9411. So this is Greet API. In the Greet API, we have one REST controller. Greet API acting as a client for service registry, acting as a client for admin server, acting as a client for Jipkin server. Now, I want to develop the Greet API. Yesterday, we have done that. So today, I'm going to create the Welcome API. My Welcome API will connect with the Greet API for inter-service communication. To achieve that inter-service communication, I'm going to use FIAN client. Okay, so Greet API is one REST API. Welcome API is one REST API. One REST API will connect with the another REST API. Earlier, we have seen how to establish communication from one REST API to another REST API by using REST template and web client. Now, today, we are going to use FIAN client. Now, let me create the new project now. So in order to create the new project, what are the dependencies we need to add? Web starter, DevTools, Eureka client, FIAN client dependency, because I want to establish the communication from one API to another API. For that, FIAN client dependency is required. Admin client will be there, Jipkin client, Slate, and actuator. Now, let me create my Welcome API project, file new, Spring Starter project. So this project name I'm giving as 34. So here, MS Welcome API. Spring Boot microservice, Welcome API I'm creating. Click on next, dependencies, DevTools, web, Jipkin, actuator, and admin client dependency I need to add. Spring Boot admin client dependency I have selected. Then I need FIAN client. Open FIAN, Spring Cloud routing concept, Open FIAN I am adding here. DevTools dependency selected and Web Starter dependency I have selected. Eureka client dependency I have to select. My application should register with the Eureka server. So Eureka discovery client I have selected. FIAN client I have selected. Admin client dependency also I have selected. Jipkin client dependency. So if I type Jipkin here, the Jipkin dependency is selected. Slate is not coming and we are going for actuator. Spring Boot actuator dependency also selected. So good, with this, all the required dependencies selected for creating this application. Click on next, click on finish. So whatever the project that I'm creating, Welcome API should register with the service registry. So to register with the service registry, I'm going to use one annotation called Enable Discovery Client annotation. So let me go to Welcome API. In the Welcome API, start class is created. For this start class, I'm writing one annotation called Enable Discovery Client annotation. Actuators also I have selected. Yes, right. Enable Discovery Client annotation I'm selecting. So with that, this application will become client for Eureka. Enable Discovery Client. So with this, we are making this application as Enable Discovery Client. And in this application, I want to use a FIAN client also for inter-service communication. For that, I'm writing Enable FIAN Clients annotation. I have given this step in the document as well. Create the project with the dependencies and configure Enable Discovery Client and Enable FIAN Clients annotations at the boot start class. First, I'm not going to create the FIAN client and I'm going to create one REST controller. New class Welcome REST controller. Let me keep that in a separate package. Welcome REST controller. Good. So to make this class as a REST controller, I'm using one annotation called @REST controller. In this, I will write one method, welcome method, public string get welcome message. So it will simply return one message, welcome to Ashok IT. That's it. It will simply return one message, welcome to Ashok IT. This method is binded to get request. I'm taking get mapping / welcome. So this is my REST controller. I created project. In that project, I configured these annotations and I have created one REST controller. And in that REST controller, I have written one method, welcome method. Okay. Then I need to configure the properties. Whatever the properties we configured in the greet API, same properties we need to configure. Properties file, convert the properties file to YML file. In this YML file, I need to configure my service name. For that, we will use spring.application.name. Spring.application.name, I'm giving the name as welcome_API. Then I want to configure port number for this. So I'm going to use server.port number. Earlier, for the greet API, I have given 9091. For this, I'm going to give 8081. Any port number you can give. Good. Now, welcome API port number is available. And I need to register welcome API with admin server. Admin server is running on the port number 1111. Spring.boot.admin client. Spring.boot.admin.client URL. Spring.admin.client URL. So what is the URL of our admin server? Admin server URL is http://localhost:1111. In the same machine, my admin server is also running. Then I want to configure actuator endpoints. I want to enable all the actuator web endpoints. For that, management.endpoints.web.exposure.include star. I want to enable all the actuator endpoints in the welcome API also. So with this, I have created my welcome API and I have created my greet API. Good. As of now, there is no communication between the welcome API and greet API, guys. Now let me go here. Let me run my service registry, run as boot application. Service registry contains Eureka server. Eureka server is running on the port number 8761. Let us go to browser and let us access that service registry that we have created. So localhost:8761. Let us see the dashboard of the service registry. The service registry dashboard, localhost:8761, it is still not accessible. 8761 port number. Is there any spelling mistake? Localhost:8761. Okay, port number wrong. 8761. Yeah, when I access 8761, you can see my Eureka server dashboard is displaying. In the Eureka server, currently no instances are available. That means no clients are registered. Eureka server is running now. I want to run my admin server. Admin server created as a separate project. Okay, go to admin server, run as boot application. Admin server will run, which is providing a UI to monitor all the backend APIs by using actuator endpoints. For the admin server, I have given the port number as 1111. So let me go and access that. Localhost:1111. Localhost:1111. So with this, my admin server also started. Currently, no applications are registered. Guys, Zipkin is not working. So I'm not starting the Zipkin. We will see the Zipkin later point of time. Okay. Now, so my service registry is started. My admin server is also started. Now, first I will start my greet API that we developed in the yesterday's class. Greet API is acting as a client for the Eureka and acting as a client for the admin server as well. Now let me go here and let me start my greet API. Refresh that project, run as boot application. Greet API should register with the service registry. Greet API should register with the admin server as well. Okay. Application is getting started. Go to browser, check your service registry. In the service registry, we can see greet API is running. And if you go for admin server, greet API already registered with the admin server. Fine. Now I want to run my welcome API. That is the another microservice that I have created. Now, welcome microservice will run on the port number 8081. Let us see the behavior of this. Guys, welcome API having YML file. From the properties file, I change it to YML. So when you do that change, you need to refresh your project. Then only it will load the YML. Then refresh, then run this application. Run as boot application. This is another backend API which will register with Eureka server as well as admin server. Now refresh and check the Eureka dashboard. Welcome API is registering with the Eureka server or not. My welcome API is getting started. My welcome API getting started. You see, it started on the port number 8080. What port number I have given? 8081. So it is not taking my port number, and the service name also it is not taking. So that means my welcome API is not loading my YML file. So for that, I will stop that welcome API and I will update that project to load the service name and all this information. Currently, it is not taking my port number. It is taking default port number, right? Right click on the project, map and update the project. Do force update. After updating this project, then let us refresh the project, refresh that. Then once it is done, then run as boot application. It should consider the port number which I have given in the YML, that is 8081. And it should consider the service name which I have given. Now go here. Now it is taking actual configuration from the YML. For many people, same problem is happening. Your YML file is not loaded properly. So update your project and refresh. Then only this YML file will be loaded. Once this welcome API is loaded, then go back here. Now you see greet API is running on the 9091 port number. Welcome API is running on the port number 8081. Got it. Now let us try to access these URLs and go to admin server. In the admin server, my greet API is registered. My welcome API also registered. Greet API running on 9091. Localhost colon 9091. Let me hit the URL to get the response from both APIs which are running. Localhost colon 9091/greet. Okay. Now I'm able to get the response from greet API. Similarly, let me go here and access my welcome API. When I access my welcome API, what is the URL pattern? 8081. 8081. Yes, my welcome API giving the response. My greet API also giving the response. Admin server is also running. Admin server registered with both APIs that I have. My Eureka server is available. Eureka server also registered with the both URLs. Are you guys clear with my point? Are you guys clear with my point? Now here, guys, as of now, is there any relation between welcome API and greet API? Currently, do we have any relation between the welcome API and greet API, or both are two independent backend APIs? Both are two independent backend APIs. Now, do you know how to access one API from another API? Normal. In the RESTful services, we discussed how to access one API from another API. Did you practice that? How many ways we can access one REST API from another REST API? How to access one REST API from another REST API? To access one REST API from another REST API, earlier we used REST template and we used PN client. We use REST template and web client. So today we are going to implement PN client. Guys, in the welcome API, I will implement my PN client. In the welcome API, I will implement my PN client. That PN client is a Spring Cloud component which is used for inter-service communication. Whenever I send a request for the welcome API, now I am getting the response, welcome to Ashok IT. When I send the request to the greet API, I'm sending the response from the greet API as good evening. Now what I want to do is understand my requirement clearly. When I send a request for the welcome API should access the greet API and it should give me the combined response. It should give me combined response. For that, let me stop my welcome API. Let me create one FIAN client in the welcome API. In the welcome API, I have already enabled FIAN clients by using enable FIAN clients annotation. Now let me create one interface as greet client FIAN interface. I'm going to create interface. This one I'm creating as greet FIAN client. Interface I'm creating as greet FIAN client. So what is the purpose of this greet FIAN client? It is responsible to access greet API method. Now greet API method will return a message. Now here I'm writing invoke greet API. Invoke greet API. For this, I'm giving the URL pattern as get mapping. So whenever I call this method, it should send the request to /greet. Now, which service it has to access? For that, I'm going to specify the service name. I'm not giving the service URL, guys. Based on the service name, it has to access. @FIAN client name is equal to greet_API. So this is the configuration that we are writing for the FIAN client. Earlier, if Make My Trip want to access IRCTC, we have given IRCTC URL in the Make My Trip, then only it is able to access IRCTC. But the beauty with the FIAN client is you no need to hard code the REST API URL for the communication. Why? Because REST API URL may change tomorrow. And one REST API may have multiple URLs. And that REST API may have load balancing. So tomorrow we'll understand what is that load balancing. Okay, guys. So here in the welcome API, I have created a FIAN client. How I created a FIAN client? I have created one interface. For that interface, I have given @FIAN client annotation. So this interface should be client for which API? Greet API. Now in this FIAN client, I'm writing one method. What is the meaning of this? Whenever you call this method, it will send a request to the greet API URL with the greet as URL pattern. So when I give the service name in the FIAN client, that FIAN client will communicate with the service registry. It will identify the URL of the service. In my Eureka server, if you observe, service name is available, service URL is available. In the program, for the FIAN client, I'm giving the service name and I'm giving the method URL pattern. So the beauty is whenever you call the FIAN client method, that FIAN client will communicate with the service registry and it will get the service URL based on the service name. So dynamically, it will get the greet API URL. Tomorrow, if you deploy greet API in the another machine, if greet API is having a different URL, different port number, if it is having multiple URLs, there is no problem because my welcome API is not connecting with the greet API by using URL. My welcome API is connecting with the greet API based on the service name. So how it will communicate with the another service by using service name? That's where the beauty of the FIAN client comes into picture. Whenever we use a FIAN client, we will give the service name. Based on the service name, it will get the service URL from the service registry, then it will communicate. Now let me go to welcome REST controller. Let me inject the FIAN client object that I have created here. Greet FIAN client I created as an interface. Implementation will be provided by Spring Cloud in the runtime. So how we have taken JPA repository for injection. Similarly, we are going to take greet client by using auto wiring. So whenever I use auto wire annotation for the greet FIAN client, it is going to create the implementation class in the runtime and it will provide that implementation. In the welcome, here I'm taking string welcome message. Okay, guys. Now I want to call greet client dot get invoke greet API. It will return greet message. Okay. Now I will combine both responses and I will return to the client. Greet message plus some space. Good morning. Then I'm going to give welcome message. Okay. So here if you observe, what is the code that I'm writing? In the welcome method, I'm accessing the greet API by using FIAN client. What is the configuration available in the FIAN client? I have given @FIAN client. So whenever I call this method, which is service it has to access, both services belongs to one project. Both services are registered with the service registry. When I send a request for the welcome REST controller with the /welcome, it will call greet client.invoke greet API. Invoke greet API is a abstract method available in the FIAN client interface. For the FIAN client, I have given the name as a greet API, get mapping as a /greet. Whenever I call this method, FIAN client will go to service registry. It will get the service URL based on the service name. For that URL, it will send a request with the /greet. Then greet controller method will be called. Greet controller will give some response. Whatever the response coming from the greet controller, I'm storing in the variable. My welcome response is available. Greet response I'm getting from the greet API. Combined response I'm sending to the client. So if we are able to get the combined response, that means our inter-service communication is a success. How we are doing that inter-service communication? By using FIAN client. Observe the FIAN client interface here. Observe the FIAN client interface here. Are you guys able to understand what is the FIAN client that I'm creating? Are you guys able to understand what is the FIAN client I'm creating? Guys, come on. It is just interface. In the start class, I'm using enable FIAN clients and I created one interface. In that interface, I have given the service name with which it has to communicate. And I am invoking that interface here by using auto wiring. So for this, the service implementation class will be created in the runtime. By using this, I'm invoking the greet API. Now let me start all my applications. So with this, you can see Eureka server is running. Admin server is also running. Now let me start my welcome API and greet API. Greet API, I hope it's already registered with Eureka. I have changed it welcome API. Let me refresh and let me run this. Run as boot application. It failed. Console. Service ID not legal hostname greet -API. So maybe I need to give underscore. Underscore is not considering, guys. Let me give -. So underscore, if I am giving for that, it is not accepting. Let me change the service name. Greet -API. Okay. Let me refresh this. Let me stop all the services once. Similarly, for welcome also, I will give welcome -API. Underscore, it is not considering. For welcome API, go to the YML file and welcome -API. Okay. Refresh this. Refresh all the projects. Then run them. Close this. Okay. Run the service registry. Run as boot application. My Eureka server will run on the port number 8761. Clear the console. So go to Eureka. It is running. Currently, no instances are available. Now, let me go for admin server. Run as boot application. Clear the console. Go to admin server. Refresh. Admin server also running. No applications are registered. Now, finally, run the greet API. Run as boot application. Run as boot application. Greet API should register with Eureka and should register with the admin server. It started. Go to Eureka. Greet API is registered. This is the URL. It is registered with the admin server as well. Now go here. Let me run my welcome API. Refresh. Run as boot application. It is failing. Welcome API is failing. Illegal state. Service ID is not a legal host name. I think in the welcome API, I have not changed the URL name in the FIAN client. Go to this FIAN client, greet-API I have given to communicate with the greet service. Welcome API should communicate with the greet API. That is inter-service communication. To achieve that inter-service communication, I have taken FIAN client. Refresh, run as boot application. Go to the console. Now it is trying to start. FIAN client is available. It started successfully. Okay. Now go to browser, refresh Eureka. Eureka having greet API as one client, having welcome API as one client. And go to admin server. In the admin server, greet API registered 1 minute ago. Welcome API registered just 20 seconds ago. So with this, two APIs are ready. They are running. Now guys, if you observe, my greet API is independent API. Okay. So it is not having any dependency with any other API. When I send a request for the greet API, I'm getting the message as good evening that is returning by greet REST controller. But when I go for welcome API, when I send the request for the welcome API, you see, I'm getting the good evening and I'm getting welcome to Ashok IT. Who is giving good evening message? Who is giving good evening message? Can I say inter-service communication is working now? Can I say inter-service communication is working now? So I'm sending a request to 8081/welcome. Which API is running on the port number 8081? Which API running on the port number 8081? Welcome API is running on the port number 8081. When I send a request to localhost:8081/welcome, I'm getting only welcome API response, or I'm getting greet API plus welcome API response. I'm getting greet API plus welcome API response. So what is the meaning of this, guys? What is the meaning of this? Can I say welcome API is accessing greet API? Can I say one API is communicating with another API? Can we call it as a inter-service communication? One REST API is communicating with another REST API. Earlier, we implemented that communication by using REST template and web client. So today, how we are establishing the communication from one API to another API by using FIAN client. So when I'm going for the FIAN client, am I configuring my target API URL? I'm configuring target API service name. Am I configuring the target API URL, or I'm configuring the target API service name? If I configure the URL, what is the problem? Now, in the welcome API, I have created a FIAN client. My FIAN client is a interface. Listen carefully, guys. FIAN client is very important topic. FIAN client I have created as an interface. For the FIAN client, I have given @FIAN client name is equal to greet API. I'm telling you which is my target API, which API I want to access, that API service name I am configuring. If you go to here in the Eureka, you can see the name of the service. So what is the service name? Greet-API. So when I give this service name, my FIAN client will communicate with the service registry. It will fetch the service URL dynamically. Now, do I need to hard code the URL of the API to communicate, or I don't need to hard code the URL of the API for communication? In the REST template, you need to give the URL of IRCTC to access. In the web client, you need to give the URL of the IRCTC to access. Tomorrow, if IRCTC URL got changed, then your REST template logic will not work and your web client logic also will not work. In this scenario, tomorrow if greet API is URL got changed, do I need to change my FIAN client, or I no need to change my FIAN client? Tomorrow if greet API URL got changed, tomorrow greet API I am running in multiple servers. Load balancing I have implemented for greet API. Multiple URLs will be available. When there are multiple URLs for the greet API, do I need to change my FIAN client, or I no need to change my FIAN client? Do I need to change my FIAN client or I no need to change my FIAN client? I no need to change my FIAN client. Why? My FIAN client is communicating through service name or my FIAN client is communicating with service URL. Guys, observe. FIAN client is communicating with the service name or FIAN client is communicating with the service URL. FIAN client is communicating with the service URL, not service URL. It is communicating with the service name. So tomorrow if Greet API is having multiple URLs, tomorrow if Greet API URL got changed, I no need to change my FIAN client. FIAN client is an interface. In that interface, I'm writing an abstract method. You no need to write the logic for this method. Internally, here, Spring Cloud will provide the implementation for our method. In the data JPA, we are calling find all method. When we call the find all method, do we have the implementation for that method or implementation is provided in the runtime? Guys, for the data JPA methods, are we writing the implementation or we are writing only custom queries, abstract methods? In the data JPA, we have learned custom queries and we have learned find by methods, abstract methods. For those abstract methods, JPA will provide the implementation in the runtime. Similarly, when we are using FIAN client, the implementation will be provided for the FIAN client in the runtime by Spring Cloud. You no need to write the logic to access the REST API. You just tell which API you want to access, what is the URL pattern of the API. This method name can be anything. I can give M1 also. When I call this M1, it will call greet API / greet. That is the meaning of this method. That is the meaning of this method. Now here, I have created my FIAN client. This FIAN client is an interface, guys. I have injected the FIAN client in the welcome REST controller by using auto wiring. What is the meaning of injecting an interface? For that interface, implementation class will be created in the runtime. That implementation class object will be injected. That implementation class object will be injected. Now, for this interface, implementation class will be created in the runtime. And here in the welcome REST controller, I have a method which is mapped to /welcome. So this is my welcome message I want to send to the client. By using this FIAN client object, I'm calling invoke greet API. What will happen when I call invoke greet API? It will send a request to service registry, get the service URL based on the service name. Greet API service name I have. For this Greet API, what is the URL? Who knows that URL? Service registry know that URL. FIAN client will communicate with the service registry, will get the service URL from the service registry, and it will send a request with the /greet URL pattern. Then Greet API will return good evening message that I am storing into another variable. So this message plus this message I am combining and I am giving a final response from the welcome. So here it is making inter-service call. One service is making a call to the another service by using FIAN client. So one REST API can talk to another REST API in 3 ways in the Spring Boot. One is by using REST template. Second one is by using web client. Third one is by using FIAN client. FIAN client generally will be used in the microservices if one service wants to communicate with the another service. So the another advantage we have with the FIAN client is you no need to write the logic to make the call. You just write the abstract method. It will execute the logic in the runtime to make that call. And another advantage, you no need to hard code the URL to access the service. URL will be fetched from service registry based on the service name. So there are several advantages are available with the FIAN client. Now go to Greet API and send the request 9091/greet. I'm getting only good evening message from the Greet API. Go to welcome and send the request. I'm getting this is message from Greet API, this message from welcome API. Both combined and sending the final response from the welcome API. So with this, you understand what is FIAN client and how to use a FIAN client. 3 things I have done to use the FIAN client. One thing is I have added open FIAN dependency in the pom.xml. Guys, if you see here, I have done 3 things here. What are those 3 things? First thing is I have added open FIAN dependency in the pom.xml. In order to work with the FIAN client, we need to add this open FIAN dependency in the pom.xml. And the second thing is I have enabled FIAN clients in my application. in the welcome API project, I have written one annotation called enable FIAN clients. And the third change that I have done is I have created one interface to make a call for the greet API. This is the greet API URL. Whenever we call this method, it will get the URL from the service registry based on the service name, and it will send the get request. Get mapping means get request to this URL pattern. That will give the response. In the welcome REST controller, I'm injecting the FIAN client and I'm calling the FIAN client method. This will make a web service call to the greet API, get the response given by the greet API, combine the response and send the final response to the client. This is called inter-service communication. Okay, sir, when we can go for this inter-service communication? If your APIs, which API want to access which API? Here, welcome API accessing the greet API. Both APIs should be registered with the service registry. Then only we can use the FIAN. Okay, with the service name. Greet API is registered with the service registry. Welcome API also registered with the service registry. If both APIs are registered with the service registry, then you can give the service name for the FIAN client for communication. Suppose my IRCTC API is available. It is running in the AWS. So that is not registered with our service registry. In that scenario, we can go for URL configuration also. If you don't want to configure the service name, you can configure the URL also. So let me configure the URL http://localhost:/8081/9091. That is the URL of my greet API. See the URL of the greet API. Greet API URL is 9091. I have configured that URL. Earlier I configured service name. Now I am configuring service URL for the FIAN client. Let us see, is it going to work or not? It is failing. Either name or a value must be provided in the FIAN client. Name or value. Okay. Instead of the URL, let me give it as a value. Let me give this as a value. Which URL it has to hit up? I'm giving that value. I'm giving that value. Application started. Okay, guys, good. Instead of the name, I'm giving the value. Now go here and let us make a request to /welcome. Go to another tab and make a request to the /welcome. Now it is failing. Get a localhost:9090 load balancer does not contain an instance of the service localhost. Okay, I cannot give that URL directly like this. Let me take this URL now. Direct URL it is not accepting. And let me give http://9091. With the URL I want to communicate directly. I'm giving that URL http:// that is the URL of our greet API. Go back and hit that URL /welcome. This site cannot be reached. Welcome API is not running. Let me stop this welcome API and run it again. Right click, run as boot application. No, it is not accepting that URL as well. Service ID not legal host name for the greet API. It is not considering that URL as well. Okay, what are the other parameters are available? Name is available, URL is available, and value is available. Name is equal to greet-API and value is equal to http:// it is running in the localhost 9091. Okay, let me try with this. My welcome API got stopped. Let me run this. Run as boot application. Run as boot application. Different alias. Bean definition exception. Failed to read the candidate component. Nested exception. Attribute name and its alias value are declared with the value of greet API and this. They are not accepting. greet API and URL. Guys, it is not accepting this URL. It is accepting only the service name. I will check how to configure the URL instead of that. But generally, configuring the URL is not recommended because URL can change in the future. Now I'm giving only service name and let me try this. Is it working or not? Run as boot application. With the service name, it already worked. We practically tested this as well. With the service name, it is working. So go here and give welcome. Yes, I'm getting the response from both APIs. Okay, guys. Did I give spelling mistake in the URL localhost? Huh? Localhost. Okay. Let me try. No, it's failing, guys. If I give correct URL also, it is failing. Localhost 9091, proper value I have given. It is not taking that. If I give only URL, we tested this also, right? http:// localhost:/9091 URL and a name. Just dummy name I am giving, not the original API name I am giving. Okay. Clear the console, go here and refresh. Go to new tab. Yes, perfect. Now it is working, guys. So now you see, I'm able to send the request. I'm able to send the request for welcome API with this URL 8081/welcome. I'm getting the good evening and I'm getting the welcome to Ashok. So how I am configuring now? I'm giving the URL and I'm giving some name. So here with VN client, I'm able to access the another API by using URL. I can access by using service name. This is one approach, and another approach is also available. So that is the recommended approach. Instead of giving everything here, we are giving only the name is equal to greet API. Guys, so there are two approaches available. In these two approaches, which one is recommended? Guys, there are two approaches available. In these two approaches, which one is recommended? First approach is recommended or second approach is recommended? Which approach is recommended? First approach is recommended or second approach is recommended? First approach is recommended. Why first approach is recommended? Why first approach is recommended? For inter-service communication, dynamically it will get the URL. If you change the URL in the future, no issue. If I change the port number of the greet API, no issue, because based on the service name, it will identify the service URL from the service registry. Hard coding the URL is not recommended. Someone asked me, sir, can I access IRCTC API from the welcome API by using this VN client? Yes, you can give the URL of the IRCTC. You can access that. By using service name, you can access. By using URL also, you can access. But recommended one is by using service name. IRCTC not registered with our service registry, so we cannot go with the service name. We need to go with only service URL. So that's why VN client will be mainly used for inter-service communication. Inter-service communication means if both APIs are registered with the same service registry, then one service can communicate with the another service by using service registry. This VN client I have created at the welcome API. So in the diagram, it is there at the grid, but actual VN client I have created at the welcome API. In the welcome API, my VN client component is created. That VN client is used for inter-service communication. I created VN client here. Using that VN client, welcome API is able to communicate with the greet API. Guys, you got the clarity? What is VN client and how to work with VN client? Are you able to understand what is VN client and how to work with VN client? Guys, come on. Are you able to understand what is VN client and how to work with PN client? Come on, guys. Yes, PN client is an interface between two APIs, inter-service communication. One service can communicate with another service by using PN client. Okay, good. Guys, in the tomorrow session, I will explain what is load balancing. In the tomorrow session, I will explain what is load balancing. Got it? So load balancing means it is used to distribute the traffic. How to set up the load balancer, that I will explain in the tomorrow's class. Tomorrow we'll talk about load balancer as well as API gateway. Okay. Yes. How to register with Eureka manually. I have given that in the notes also, mister. So if you see the notes in the configuration, I have given this property. This is used to register with the Eureka server manually. If your Eureka server port number is 8761, you no need to register. If Eureka server running in the different machine, if Eureka server port number is different, in your API, in your REST API, you need to write this property. With this property, you can register that with the Eureka server manually. I already explained that yesterday. Yeah. Guys, anyone having any questions on PN client? Can you ask me now?
Sir, go to that interface. Sir.
This is the interface.
Yeah. Here we are mentioning service name and right. We are giving endpoint. Endpoint should be matched which is available in Grid API, sir.
In the service registry, whatever the name you are giving, with that name, there should be a service registered in the Eureka. Then only it will work. Here in the Eureka, it registered, right? The name is available. So this name you need to give here as a name. Then based on this name, PN client will go to service registry. For this name, it will get the URL. With that URL, it will send a request with the /grid URL path. This name should match with that. Where we are configuring this name? In the YML file, we are configuring spring.application.name.
Yes. But how do you know either the endpoint is there or not? Great endpoint is there or not?
You need to check the dashboard of Eureka. That's why Eureka dashboard is there. Na?
Yeah.
Which API is available? What is the name of the API? What is the status of the API? What is the URL of the API? For that only we are using service registry. Service registry will give you all the APIs which are present in your application.
Here we are seeing the only API, Grid API. Where can we see endpoints? Endpoint
Swagger documentation.
Yeah.
For that API, Swagger documentation will be available.
Okay, good.
Yeah.
Sir, can we send post request with this PN client?
Yes. If you want to send a post request from this PN client, na, suppose if the Grid API having a post request method with a different URL pattern, invoke Grid API post. Now, instead of the get mapping, we will write the annotation as post mapping.
And how can we send the payload?
Yes, just body. Suppose if you want to send some passenger data that you will send as a passenger data, you will keep that as a request body. That's
okay, got it. Thank you, sir.
Yeah, it will send you a post request to that Grid API with the request body as a passenger. If you want to send a path variable, suppose if you want to send some name, you can send the name here and that name you can pass here. String name, for that you can set it as a path variable. Then what will happen? It will send a request with the name as a path variable to that URL. So how you want to send the request, that you need to represent in the method. What type of request you want to send? What is the URL pattern? What data you want to send? How you want to send the data? Everything should be represented in the method in the PN client so that it will send that request to the Grid API based on the given URL or based on the given service name. I'm commenting the URL part. I'm enabling the service name. Giving the service name is the recommended approach. You got it?
Yeah, okay, got it. Thank you.
Sir. Hello.
Yes, sir. Tell me.
Sir, what if I pass the headers also? Then how can we pass in post request? If
So
there is a
listen,
header something.
in the post request, if you want to pass the headers also, you should not send the direct object. You need to prepare a HTTP request object. You need to pass that request as a parameter. You need to create HTTP request object. You need to send that request as a parameter.
Okay, sir.
Good. Fine. Guys, you understand PN client?
Sir, what is the exact use of the admin server, sir?
Arey Baba, after seeing this also, you are not understanding what is exact use of admin server. What is the use of admin server? What you can do here? Mister, what you can do here?
In actuators, there is info health instance.
You can monitor all your APIs endpoints at one place. So if you have normal actuator, how you will monitor? You will go to browser, you will type the URL, you will access. In the admin server, all the APIs will be displayed at one place. You can monitor all your APIs actuator endpoints with the user interface. General actuator will not provide you user interface. It will give you only data. If you want to get the data with beautiful UI, then you will go for admin server. Admin server will give you UI to monitor all the API endpoints at one place, actuator endpoints at one place. Got it?
Yes, sir. Yes.
Good. Jipkin server for log tracing. Jipkin is not working, guys. Once all the setup is completed, we will work on the Jipkin server. Generally, Jipkin will tell you how much time it is taking to process your request. Yeah. Fine, guys. So please complete this setup. As of now, we completed service registry, admin server, greet API, welcome API, and FIAN client. I want you to complete all this setup for tomorrow's session. Tomorrow we'll talk about load balancing as well as API gateway. Good. We'll see you in the tomorrow's class. Notes already updated in the portal, guys. So all the steps I have given in the notes. If you follow the steps, you will be able to complete this project. Thank you.